Creo que empezamos.
Ah, ok, ok. Entonces no digo nada.
Prontinho, estamos ao vivo.
Good evening, everyone. We are delighted to gather for the next book launch of our Routledge series, which is called Early Modern Iberian History in Global Contexts Connections. And our guests tonight include David Martín Marcos, the author of the book that we are going to discuss today, People of the Iberian Borderlands, Community and Conflict between Spain and Portugal, 1640 to 1715, Pedro Cardim, the series editor, and also Jorge Díaz Ceballos from the Escuela de Estudios Hispanoamericanos. Unfortunately, Harold Brown couldn't join us tonight. Early modern Iberian history in global context connections brings the finest scholarship in early modern Iberian history to English-speaking readers. And our authors offer original research, introduce new methodologies and approaches, and position Iberian history within comparative and global frameworks. Our series also aims to foster interdisciplinary connections, such connections and bridge national and transnational research cultures. It is also a platform where the diverse voices of the Iberian past can be heard. And to begin our conversation and our meeting today, we are also pleased to ask the editor of the series, Pedro Cardim, to shortly explain how David's books aligns with the narratives of our series of the Routledge collection. So please, Pedro, can you explain to us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank Agatha also on behalf of Harold Brown for all the work organizing this session. And of course, thank David for being with us from Providence in the US. And above all, Jorge Diaz Ceballos for his availability to critically reflect on David's book. People of the Iberian Borderlands is a work that fits perfectly into this collection because it focuses on interactions between Portuguese and Castilians in the early modern period, because it deals with, in a nuanced way, with issues of identity and political action and their complex motivations. Because it covers a particularly broad range of social actors with the allure of privileging actors from below. And last but not least, because the profile of its author fulfills one of the aspirations of this collection, to create space for young non-Anglophone historians to publish their works in English. And David, like Jorge, is part of that group. Actually, both of them, David and Jorge, are among the best of their generations, and it is therefore a great pleasure and a privilege to say these introductory words and thank again to Jorge for being here. So I now pass the floor to Jorge.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and thank you very much for these kind words that actually, thinking about generations, I will make a comment on that at the end of my presentation, so that comes very, very handy. Thanks, Agatha, for putting all this together. It's a real pleasure for me, and for all the, I know it takes a lot of effort to make these things, so thank you very much, and of course, Harald and Pedro for everything they are doing, launching this series, this very important series, which is already a landmark for Iberian studies, and is growing, and it's creating debate, and it's becoming something pretty big for the Spanish Spanish-Iberian academic system. So at first I was shocked when I received the invitation to comment on this book. So I said, why are they asking me to present David's book? I was surprised, although I happily accepted right away without hesitation, because I have mainly worked on, as you know, on colonial contexts, 16th century colonial America, and not much on frontiers, and definitely not in the Spanish-Portuguese frontier in the 17th century. It was not long before I realized it made sense that for me to read and comment on this book, and that our work have more in common than what meets the eye at first. It was when I got actually to page 6 in the book that I realized that when I read the quote, Universitas non moritur, as a quote from Kantorowicz, The King's Two Bodies, which is, by the way, one of the most influential political history books in the 20th century, at least for me. And it doesn't get all the credit it merits, I would say. I don't know. So this is a book about political communities beyond or above or within states, living in liminal spaces, liminal in geography, culture, and social realities. In the next few minutes, 5-10 minutes, I will try to make sense of why Harald and Pedro asked me to present this wonderful book, and Agatha as well. Task that I'm deeply grateful for. I am going to make some general comments and then go to make some more or less direct questions to David to open the debate and to share some general ideas, some generational ideas. Well, a brief context on how I addressed this book. I met David, I think it was in Madrid in 2015 in a seminar at Universidad Nacional a Distancia, the UNED's, David's institution, and we briefly commented on Tamar Herzog's Frontiers of Possession that just came out at that moment, 2015, if I'm not wrong. Then in 2018, I listened him speaking in Santander about the book's project already, and I was very happy to hear him bringing E.P. Thompson back onto the debate on political history. Not only social history, not economic history, or not only cultural history, but politics and political history in a wide sense. And especially on political history of the Iberian world, which is something that, I mean, bringing Thompson back to these debates, which is not so straightforward if you think about it carefully, bringing E.P. Thompson back into political history of the Iberian space. My reading of the book has been, this is a wonderful book. This is a very thoughtful book, very well thought and very well planned from the beginning. And for me, one of its main strengths of people in the Iberian borderlands is its methodology, because it's already common. Is part of our mental framework these days to highlight the importance of case studies or local case studies and to go deep into the local context to understand the importance of early modern empires, their durability, their resilience. However, it's not that easy to do the work and to succeed in doing it. I mean, going into deep local cases, and David has managed to take a deep look to very local processes with many different sources and paying attention to local particularities, social, economic context that can help to explain the functioning of Iberian monarchies as a whole. The local communities of the frontier, the Raya, had, of course, their own realities and a specific comprehension of political culture in which they move. Those communities were, at the same time, well aware of their own importance within the system and for the functioning of the whole system. And I don't think I'm overstepping here. I mean, every local community, at least in my experience, even if it was a very tiny, small villa in the middle of nowhere, would be aware of their own importance within the system of the early modern monarchies. So the book mainly challenges, among many others that I will speak about, two historiographical paradigms. One is the nation-state narratives, which is pretty clear in the very first page of the book, that underlines the importance of peace treaties and high-level political negotiations as the main or only way to understand diplomatic relations. And I will say some more about this later. The other paradigm is that David contextualizes the role of frontier communities moving away from some 19th century images or narratives of backwardness, in his own words, rural simplicity and passivity that they carried with them. This image of frontier people backwardness and simplicity is still very easy to see in some even these days narratives. Instead, what the book proves is that these Rayano communities on both sides of the Raya had and used their own agency to points in which they could choose which side of the frontier they belong to, like the villas of the Sala Valley being mentioned in page 77, which, by the way, this detail and this use of agency, of political agency and community agency impacts in other of the main recent debates that Pedro mentioned before on political history, which is identities and how to identify individuals and communities in the early modern world and how they'll self-identify themselves as well. Local communities then showed high levels of agency and further explores one of the main features of the early modern empires, which is the plurality of jurisdictions. And this is something also a generational debate. Plurality of jurisdictions connected to, of course, to Antonio Manuel España's theories, which is overflying. I don't know how to say this, but it's all over the book. Of course, it couldn't be otherwise. This plurality of jurisdiction is particularly well explored in the book through the story of the peace negotiated by the Count of Niebla with some frontier towns in chapter 6, which I think is probably the core of the whole book, how the book revolves around this. The negotiation and maintenance of that truce, of a ceasefire, highlights the coincidence of diverse political realities within the framework of the monarchy and the horizontality of political practices. One of the main theoretical principles to explain the functioning of the Iberian monarchies is, of course, the principle of aggregation of political communities. We have, of course, the composite monarchies, but also Xavier Gilles' exploration of aggregation theories. I'm thinking of Diego Pérez de Mesa or Castillo de Bobadilla, and these ideas about how parts are added to the whole without losing their own particularism. And the importance of particularism and negotiation between polities of different size and, let's say, weight within the system. This is the case of the Count of Niebla impacts in these debates and explains how these principles were executed and to what extent they worked. So this is also a very important book for understanding political practices, which is also very difficult to grasp in reality, in archival reality, so to say. The conclusion of this case, of the Count of Niebla, with some communities sticking to the truth while others were not, also highlights the principle of particularism and its central role in the monarchy's politics. Another debate which the book addresses very, very straightforward is the classic debate on center-periphery debates, and derived from that in several ideas about the concept of resistance. I know that the resistance project is over now. This is in the context in which we met in 2018 in Santander. In my view of his work, David proves that the center obviously did not impose policies on the periphery, but also that the so-called periphery was not a mere resistant to the so-called center policies, but that instead, sometimes it colluded with the center interest and sometimes it opposed it, depending, of course, on the context, again, and their own interest, economic, social, and why not political. This is then a very important book to understand the complexity of the political history of the Iberian empires, and can be very fruitful as well to understand other geographical contexts and different chronologies. It places under the spotlight the plurality of political spaces, again, a definition by Antonio Manuel España as polyvalent territories where political power was defined, negotiated, and maintained. Those plurality of political spaces that led to a plurality of political cultures in plural within the empire. There was not just one political culture for the whole Iberian world, but a collusion of different political cultures that were defined and redefined over time. In this case, we see a plurality of political cultures based on a shared understanding of the frontier as a limit, but also as a space in which to survive and thrive, very marked by socioeconomic limitations and by socioeconomic traditions and we see the use of commons, we see the use of houses of trade, we see the use of illegal practices to cross the line and to build new relationships in the horizontal level. The frontiers explored in this book is vertical. You see the raya is a vertical line, but also horizontal. And if you see the map, which is included in the introduction, you can see easily how small communities were on one side or the other of the frontier, always at the same level, like neighborhoods, like neighbors, with constant relationship between villas and towns on both sides of the raya that shared common interest and a similar political culture, exemplified in the way they solved conflict and negotiated spaces of power. Now we would like to make some further comments and questions now to David and try to open a conversation, which is one of my favorite words, about some issues that are explored in the book. I would like to know a bit more about his opinion on diplomacy, how the idea of diplomacy from below or diplomacy without diplomats is bringing attention these days. At the end of the day, what is diplomacy? I mean, are we not blurring the lines of traditional diplomacy? And I'm not against this at all, to be honest, by focusing on agents, people, or communities for roles traditionally carried out by diplomats, whatever that means. I'm thinking now of other book on this same series, José Miguel Escribano's book on Juan Rena, who was this person who acted as an official and unofficial diplomat during the first half of the 16th century and ended up building and protecting frontiers and crossing them and acting as a sort of handyman for the monarchy. How do you think your book connects with this historiography of new diplomacy, diplomacy from below, and so on? You claim on page 110 that actually the from below approach has silenced alternative diplomatic agents. How do you redefine diplomacy in light of your own experience? I know I warned that the questions are going to be pretty difficult. So this is food for thought more than anything else. I was wondering as well, connected to what I just said, how do you dialogue with these literatures on go-betweens or in-betweens, and thinking of very strong in colonial American historiography, and thinking of Jana Yanakaki's work, or Alida Metcalf for Brazil, or Emran Gurkan for the Ottoman world, how this literature is can establish a dialogue with your own ideas. In parallel with your book, actually, I've been reading Lauren Benton's latest book. They call it Peace, on small wars and the micro-analysis of conflicts at the threshold of war and peace. And I believe your work somehow is connected with her approach. Her argument is that it just came out like in February, so it's very, very, very new. Her argument is that the small-scale conflicts within larger imperial violence is crucial to understand how precisely imperial violence was justified. So you also look at those moments between war and peace in which small-scale conflicts and conflict resolution contributes to our common understanding of larger politics, like monarchies, while exploring social dynamics sometimes hidden underneath. And my question would be, how do you think, and this is particularly difficult, I guess, how do you think actually violence or the threat of violence helps explaining the construction of these political cultures, frontier political cultures? Lastly, and then I come back to generational issues. A classic debate on Iberian historiography that our generation, David and myself, although he's a bit older than I am, by the way, belong to already, that our generation inherited the debate on the destruction of the state paradigm, or whatever you want to call it, with Clavero, España, Alvaradejo, and so on. We inherited that, and we are somehow working still on rebuilding what they somehow tear down, or try, okay, what's left there? How we construct something from that without the state being the actor, the main actor of political history. So how does the state paradigm survives this? A book like yours, for example. Is there a way to accommodate ideas of the centralized, council-centered political history with histories focused on territories and the agency of small political communities? I know probably there is no answer, but it's still worth asking, and asking ourselves how historiographical traditions change over time, and how we reconstruct paradigms, if there is still any paradigm, which is something I doubt. So these are my questions. We can dialogue for hours. This is a wonderful book, and thank you very much for the opportunity you gave me to read it and comment on it. And I invite everyone interested in these topics and interested as well in new historiographical trends, I would say, and methodology in general, to read it if they have not done so. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. Now I pass the floor to David so he can answer to your questions. It's like you said, it's really food for thought. So I'm sure David will have a lot to say about your reflections and remarks. So David, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Jorge. Thank you so much for your comments, your wise and useful comments, I will say. Your reading of the book was impressive, was deep, really attentive, and I think that reveals paths toward further research as well. I'm very, very grateful for your comments and for your ideas, because at the same time, your comments, I think, that led me to rethink some of my assumptions about Borderlands communities and their agency in the framework of the Iberian monarchies. And this is because also your studies on Castillo del Oro has been very inspiring for me and for my future as a researcher. I don't know if I have an answer for all your questions, but I don't know. Maybe I can refer some ideas, not really linked, but let me before say thank you as well to Agatha for organizing this meeting, and before starting my elocution, I would like to thank Harald Brown and Pedro Cardin as well, because both are responsible for this series, and because I want to thank them because they encouraged me to engage my research with international historiographical debates and with a broader audience. I think that by doing so, this book is maybe an example for other scholars from Spain and Portugal, and that want to leave their comfort zone. I did that. It was not easy. Sometimes it was quite hard, but I think that at the same time, I can say that it was on a writing and dynamic process. So I don't know if today I am a better historian than in 2015 when I met Jorge, or than in 2018. However, what I can say is that after reading this book, I am a different historian, and this is because, and this is in relation with your comments on, or your idea of this state paradigm that has characterized the early modern historiography on the Spanish monarchy. I have studied traditionally the relations between Spain and Portugal, but mainly focused on international relations and diplomacy. And I think that my book Península de Recelos, published in 2014, was a good example of this approach. At that time, I was also particularly interested in the Portuguese side of the Iberian relation. I was interested in Portugal after the Restoration period, but not as a passive or defensive actor against the Spanish monarchy, but rather as a proactive agent in the framework of the Spanish dynastic crisis at the end of the 17th century. Honestly, I think that I did it was not a bad job. I had excellent hosts in Portugal. I had access to an extensive documentation in Torredo Tombo or in Biblioteca de Ayuda or in Simancas archives in Spain. But I have to say that at that time, I have always the feeling that I was missing a large number of things, lives and issues about ordinary people living between Spain and Portugal, but not only with a social approach, but thinking on a political approach. And this is why I decided to study the borderlands communities of the Raya during the so-called Restoration War. I had the opportunity to explain the conflict, and that was very important for me, in a different way by analyzing the people who lived in the middle of a war. I think that traditionally historians had denied an active role to these people. They were characterized just as people who had to flee, or if they stay in the borderlands, to resist and suffer the consequence of the war. So sometimes smuggling was the main argument to speak about these Rayanos. And of course, all of these topics are important, but they are not enough, from my point of view, to offer a complete portrait of the Raya, and to offer a complete portrait of the political discourse of the Iberian relation, of the relations between the Spanish monarchy and Portugal. So I firmly believe that our understanding of the conflict between Portugal and the Spanish monarchy can change if, rather than focusing on the governments, on the diplomacy, we study other issues, particularly the relations between these borderland communities. Or this is available for other contexts, of course. Therefore, studying this period from a diverse angle, I think that challenges our understanding on the dynamics of union and disunions, on this idea of aggregation and desegregation, that traditionally, as you say, Jorge, distinguished the relation, the history of the relation of Spain and Portugal. In my view, I think it's possible to integrate the Rayanos in the Iberian political history of the early modern period. As I referred in the introduction of the book, I think it's important to find the real agency of these borderland communities. Over the course of the book, I argue sometimes that the defense of local communities undertaken by these gente de raya, these people of the Iberian borderlands, during the early modern period was of key importance to understanding their behavior and attitudes. This is why the book seeks to relativize the value of concepts of frontier construction and subversion. So I think that the book explores a third path, a third via. I think that the historical writing produced on either side of the frontier, which sustained the discursive binomial on the frontier's construction and subversion, has been configured by these all meta-narratives that revolve around the affirmation of state-like structures. For me, this is important because I want to highlight that maybe it is not correct an understanding of the frontier exclusively associated with the development of the modern state, of course. In this framework, the frontier's inhabitants are merely represented as examples of a received idea of the resistance to modernization, but it is also not correct the approach that used by studies that have prioritized a focus from below, particularly when they give the Rayanos a preponderant or exclusive role in managing the frontiers of these Iberian monarchies. So the binomial construction subversion of the frontier to explain the agency of the borderlands communities, I think that provides uncompleted information on this group. My understanding is that the survival of local communities by themselves is more important than anything else to understand this process. These communities aspired for the frontier to become an instrument that will ensure their survival, yet without the frontier becoming an end in itself, nor a wall to be demolished, I said in the book. Thereby, my study seeks to address the fact that the internal functioning of a region often depended less on a large-scale imperial policy, but rather on the immediate special concern of those who inhabited it. So let me see your comments. Let me see your question. Yeah, this idea of the other spaces, the colonial framework. Well, in relation to this, I want to point the following. There have been many times in which colonial Latin American frontiers were presented as particularly anomalous zone in order to contrast with mathematical European frontiers. This is something that we can find in Lauren Benton works, as I explained in the book. In this non-European context, historians have said traditionally that pragmatism was the rule, and adaptation to the specific local conditions provided the best demonstration that these territories were molded by a dense juxtaposition of legal practice. We come back to this later. Is the traditional, the classical idea of España, or so many others. But the book argues, in contrast, that the metropolitan space was riddled with anomalous legal zone as well. So in these areas, these officials of the Iberian monarchies were likewise obligated to undertake an exercise of adaptation. So this statement is not intended to claim that, how to say that, that the Iberian frontier territories should be conceptualized exactly like the American ones. But what I intend to say is, raising this issue is that things are not so simple. Why in the early modern period the Rayanos were often compared to Native American peoples by the Iberian elites? Is there a transversal idea of barbarism linking America and rural Europe? That's what I want to research on the future. Why was so strong the topic of the internal indies to speak on Rayanos or other peasants during the early modern period? I still don't have an answer for this, and I don't have an answer for many of your questions, Jorge. But I want to work on these questions in a new project, because many questions arise from my book. Diplomacy from below. Are we blurring the lines of traditional diplomacy? Well, I think that truces, ceasefires, local agreements are speaking to us of an idea of negotiation that is very, very strong, and that normally was not considered by historians of diplomacy, and this was because and this is the idea of the bottom-up view, this history from below. This history from below traditionally looks to history of diplomacy with no good eyes, with some reservations. So I don't know, but I think that there is a kind of diplomacy from below, or at least this idea of agreement, an idea of building truces, building ceasefires, building small treaties, small agreements that rule the whole life of communities in the both sides of the frontier. So that's what I can say. And thank you for this reference on the new Lauren Benton's book, because I didn't know about this. So
it just came out. It came out in February, so
I'm always late. So okay, and yeah, that's what I can. What can I say about?
David, may I jump into the conversation and ask you, and Jorge, do you allow me to say a few words?
Go ahead, Pedro.
I was wondering, what was your reaction when we started to work with sources that for this book, I mean, that had very little to do with the kind of sources and social actors you were used to deal with, because your previous works mostly focus on elites, power elites, courtly elites, diplomacy, different kinds of political actors, all of them from the higher echelons of society. And for this book, you really had to deal with a range of social actors that are totally different, almost at the opposite side of the social spectrum. My question has to do with archives. Did you feel what historians working on lower groups, men and women from the lower groups, often claim that these persons are invisible, and their agency, their specific characteristics of each one of them, they are even either omitted, or they seem to be flattened, because classified as with categories that generalize and they do not allow for distinguishing them. So it's a question about the archives and the subjectivity of the protagonists of your stories. How did you cope with these archives? Most of them local archives, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of them local archives. How was the adaptation, and to what extent do you feel the same frustration of not being able to see a lot of the people you are dealing with, because the archives don't tell us much about them? Is this the case, or will you tell us something else?
Yeah, as you know, Pedro, traditionally, the diplomacy of court elites sources are quite more rich, but I have to confess that I was tired of this kind of history that I was doing before. So, well, I started to study these other people, these small communities, and I was fascinated with them. It's more difficult, of course. So many times they are eluded. It's not like studying an ambassador or a representative of the monarchies. I think the process is quite different, because you cannot read like a series letters of these people. So yeah, sometimes there was some kind of frustration on my research, but I think that it's possible to get their subjectivities. I think that you need to do like an exercise of rereading the traditional way of studying these people. Of course, I worked a lot with local archives, but I have to say that Simancas was as well very important, and this was important for me, not only in order to organize my research, but I think that this circumstance allows me to know that these people were able to send their message to the court, to the Consejo de Estado sometimes. So they are able to reach their problems when they want to. So I think that sometimes they don't appear in the sources because they don't want to. Of course, the smuggling is the perfect case of this thing, but when there is a problem that deals with the property of the land, with the access to some resources of these communities, they are able to make rumors and to put their problem on a state or national state sphere. So that's what that's the idea. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Jorge, would you like to say something else about the book or respond to David's comments?
I want to add something which is also generational in a way. and I'm sorry about that because I picked that from Pedro's introduction, so I keep thinking on those terms now, which is this thanks as well to of course Pedro's own work and reflections on Iberian empires, that we are more somehow free to explore new avenues of looking at political reality. And I'm thinking of political history of the time, because social historians or economic historians had looked at these people from different angles, but their political agency and how they could translate their local problems into the court and negotiate their own capacity to thrive and to live in those communities. And you said in your response, the survival of these local communities by itself is the most important conclusion of this, that they managed to find their place and to keep living the way they lived, being part of the system. And this is something I find as well in colonial territory, that these small communities find ways of creating their own political culture and proving it was perfectly able to fit into the larger framework. And that is something that the monarchy, on the other hand, was willing to accept, because my impression is that the Council of the Indies, in the Council of State, they were very happy when the problems were solved by themselves in the territories, and they didn't have to, send somebody there to work. So my impression is that we are now looking at the same problems from the other side, and we are finding that the system somehow worked because it was flexible enough to include all these particularities and local situations into a framework there was not a constitution. It was written nowhere, so it was very, very flexible and easy to adjust, and it was maleable, como se dice en castellano. So that's my impression of your book, and some of the books I'm reading these days of people coming from previous generation and working on these days on political history. So I was very impressed by the approach, your approach. So thank you very much, really, and congratulations.
Thank you, Jorge. I think that we need to write a new history, a history of these communities without thinking on permanent on the Spanish monarchy or on the Kingdom of Portugal. I think that, of course, it's important, the framework, and this will be there all the time. But I think that the problem is that when we think that every single thing that they do was to go against them, against the Spanish monarchy, or to construct the Spanish monarchy. So they have their own agency. Sometimes deals with this or fit with the Spanish monarchy policy, sometimes not. So and this is not a paradox. It's not at all. It's not a paradox.
Oh, thank you,
Do you have
David.
more questions? Our meeting is coming to end, unfortunately. We are running out of time, but if you have more questions, it's also very important to remember we don't want to give so many spoilers about the book. We would like also everybody that is here watching us and is going to watch us, because you could also access the video in the following days, in the following months. So of course we would like to share and wake your curiosity, actually. So no spoilers.
Thank you, Agatha.
Just a very quick remark, stressing the fact that David is now in Providence with a grant from the John Carter Brown Library, and this project is, like he said, about the connection, this complex connection between representations of peasant world in Europe and the image of the Amerindians in the New World, and how these two set of images end up interacting and also playing a role in the whole political process of the early modern period, right, David? So perhaps a good way of closing this conversation would be to listen a little bit to what you have to say about the connection between this book we are discussing here today and the following step you've made in your trajectory. So it sounds as if you felt the need to go beyond those communities and also see what's going on outside Europe with communities, with peoples, men and women who are or who were described in a sometimes in a similar way to those you've been studying for the past few years, and the book is the result of that study. So could you very briefly tell us a little bit about the connections between this book we are discussing today and your current project?
Yeah, of course, Pedro. My research here in my research project in the JCB library in Brown University deals with the discourse about rusticity and barbarism, both in Europe and America. So it's the representation or how the difference was constructed to speak about Iberian peasants and Amerindian peoples. And yeah, I want to show how there is like the peasant, the Western European rustic person was employed as a starting point for a comparative ethnology about the Native American. We can think about the school of Salamanca about this, but at the same time, I want to mix or I want to connect this with the idea of the internal indies. That this notion was very, very strong in the early modern Europe, and it was used to categorize European rural areas. So I argue on this basis that the circulation of stereotypes about rusticity and barbarism was really fluid and constant during the early modern period. So that's the idea. The idea is to pay attention on how this process build the image of a rustic and of the barbarian subject linked to the Americas. I think that it's important for the research the idea of the classical idea of miserabile persona that we found in the Portuguese and Castilian law, and it's a theological doctrine as well, and how this was employed sometimes to classify indigenous people in the Americas, but sometimes to refer the inhabitants of some regions of Europe, of the Iberian Peninsula, but not only of the Iberian Peninsula. We can think on Adriano Prosperi's work on missionaries on the southern Italy. So that's the point. That's the idea. I want to make these connections between the Iberian Peninsula and these Americas, and how does it work? Of course, I'm not trying to equate the status of the European rural communities, of course, to the indigenous who were incorporated to the Iberian empires, but my approach wants to assume that the way the ruling elites approached to this population across America and the Iberian Peninsula has many points in contact. That's the idea of my research here in Providence.
Okay, sounds fascinating. Thank you very much, David. Jorge, would you like to say a few words before we close this session?
No, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to read your next book on these topics, which are also reminds me of John Eliot's The Old World and the New, where he started trying to make the connection back to Europe on the impact of the old world, on the new world, on the old. So it's a classic, but it's always for me it's my favorite Eliot's book on the old world and the new, is from the 60s. It's great. So some ideas were already somehow there. So go for it, and good luck in the library.
Yeah.
I'm quite jealous of you right now, to be honest.
It's
We
cold
are
here.
all jealous.
It's quite cold.
Thank
here.
you, Jorge. So
Okay.
Agatha, the floor is yours for closing remarks.
So thank you very much for all of you, and also for those who are going to watch and are watching us right now. So we are also very happy to share our collection, and also you could please follow us on Facebook. We have our fan page. We have also our website and also official website of the Routledge. You can follow us, and you can also wait for the coming book launches, and still we have lots to offer in the collection. So please follow also us, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
So bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Jorge. Bye, David.
Chao.
Good luck.
Hablamos pronto.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
No, muchas
Thank you,
gracias.
Jorge.
¿eh?